Hello, my name is Bryce Ritter, and this is my presentation on fingerprint and biometric security. Biometric security is defined as a modern authentication method that uses unique physical traits to verify a person's identity. Because these physical features are unique to the individual, they are virtually impossible to replicate and/or forget. There are three primary categories of biometrics that include biological, that uses traits at a genetic or molecular level. This may include DNA, blood, or bodily fluid samples. Physiological is the main one, which pertains to the structure of one's body. It recognizes physical traits such as the eyes, fingerprints, and/or the shape/depth of one's face. Finally, the behavioral, which is based on patterns that are unique to each individual. This may include how somebody walks, vocal recognition, or even how you type on a keyboard. So how does it work? Biometric security operates in four stages. The capture stage is the initial stage of setting up a biometric security system to first capture the unique characteristic from the user. This may vary depending on the type of biometric being applied. Typically, scanners are used to read the information where it is then passed on to be analyzed. The second stage is feature extraction, where in this stage, features from the capture are analyzed to recognize patterns and create a template of the scan using notable features from said scan. Third stage is storing, which is where the data from that capture must then be stored so it can be used for future verification. In most cases, a template is made, whether it be fingerprint patterns or vocal pitch or any other form, and is then encrypted and securely stored in a database alongside other users' biometric data. The next stage is verification or identification, which are slightly different. Verification is used to ensure that a person is who they claim to be. Their data is compared to the previously stored information, and if a match is found, the person is verified. Identification is used in the instance that the identity of the person is not known beforehand, meaning it must be applied and checked against a larger selection of templates. The example I like to use to explain this is that using Touch ID or Face ID on your phone knows that you are the only user, so it only has to check against one record. However, if you were using a fingerprint to get into a building, that system would have to check your fingerprint against the entire database of authorized users. Here's some types of biometrics. First one is fingerprints. Fingerprint recognition involves mapping unique patterns of ridges and valleys of an individual fingerprint. Because fingerprints are unique to individuals, it makes them an effective biometric security measure. Some of their uses also include unlocking smart devices, restricting access to secure areas. Law enforcement uses fingerprints to identify individuals, and some clock-in systems even have fingerprint scanners built in to prevent buddy punching, which is where you have a coworker clock in for you if you're late. Fingerprints consist of ridges and valleys, which are raised lines and indentations that form patterns. The major three patterns are arches, loops, and whorls, which are all indicative of the pattern that they create. And minutiae are the key components that are used to distinguish one fingerprint from another. Some examples of these are ridge endings, which is where a ridge suddenly ends. Bifurcation, where a ridge branches out into two or more ridges. A hook, where a ridge joins a longer ridge but does not cross. A dot is a very small and or short ridge. An enclosure is when one or more ridges encloses a space. A bridge is when a small ridge joins two longer adjacent ridges. And a crossing is where two ridges intersect. And you can see some of those over on this figure on the right side. So capturing fingerprints. Fingerprints must be scanned prior to a template being created, and the primary methods of scanning are optical scanners, capacitive scanners, and ultrasonic scanners. Optical scanners use light to capture an image of the fingerprint, where the light is passed through a prism and a sensor detects the light being reflected from the ridges and uses that data to create a digital image. Capacitive, however, uses electrical current via arrays of small capacitors to determine where the ridges of a fingerprint lie, and it then passes that data onto an analog to digital converter to create a scan of the fingerprint. Finally, in an ultrasonic scanner, an ultrasonic transmitter and a receiver are used where a pulse is transmitted against the fingerprint when it's scanned, where some of it is absorbed by the valleys and some of it is reflected back to the sensor by the ridges. And the sensor then reads the intensity of the ultrasonic waves being reflected at multiple points and uses that data to create a 3D render of the fingerprint. Facial recognition is a way to determine the similarity between two faces by comparing distinguishing features of someone else's face against existing scans to ensure identity. Some steps used in facial recognition include the first step being detection, which consists of detecting a face from a larger image by identifying distinguishing features and determining the location of the face within the frame. The second one is analysis, which is once a face has been detected and located, facial features are analyzed based on the geometry of the face. Some notable features that it looks out for are the eyes, cheekbones, nose, lips, and the shape of the jawline. The third step is extraction, which uses the data gathered from the analysis step to create a facial template or a digital map of the facial geometry using those landmark points. Finally, the comparison stage is when the template is then compared against a database of known faces using complex matching algorithms. AI and deep learning algorithms allow this system to learn from large data sets and continuously improve over time. These algorithms also help account for differences in light levels and facial expressions, or even if your face is at a different angle than that of the scan being compared. There are also three primary methods for facial recognition. The first one is 2D, which detects prominent facial features such as like the eyes, nose, mouth, and jawline again, and uses these points as landmarks to make a template of the face. That template is then compared to a database of existing templates to verify the person's identity. Next step is 3D, which overcomes some of the limitations of the 2D recognition by being able to capture depth and contour. Using specialized cameras, the 3D recognition uses structured infrared light to determine depth of the important features rather than just getting a simple 2D image. This allows for better recognition when the lighting is low or the angle is different than that of the existing template, or even when facial expression is altered. Once features are mapped, the details are mapped to a digital signature to be cross-referenced with other templates. And the final method is thermal recognition, which uses infrared sensors to detect heat patterns being emitted by a person's face. Each person's face has a distinct thermal pattern, which is then used again to build a template. And unlike 2D or 3D, infrared does not rely on visible light, which makes it effective regardless of the light level or even if it is pitch black. One downside, however, though, to thermal recognition is that it may not be as detailed of 2D or 3D just because of the simplicity of the thermal pattern being shown. Vocal recognition seeks to identify an unknown individual by comparing their voice against a database of recorded voices. Each voice has a unique feature, such as pitch, tone, accents, and speech patterns that make it distinct and identifiable. Like other forms of biometric information, speech recognition can be broken down into stages, which are the capture stage, where a microphone is used to record the sounds of someone speaking, and that signal is then converted to digital format via an analog to digital converter. Some pre-processing may be done in certain systems to remove noise and echoing, like background noise, but that is not always the case. Now, the next stage is feature extraction. The audio is broken up into 20 to 40 millisecond segments to analyze at a smaller scale and capture the nuances of the speech, which really show the key features of pitch, tone, accent, and speech patterns. Techniques such as Fourier transformation and Mel-frequency septual coefficients help to recognize the unique characteristics needed to identify the voice and help show it be unique. The third step is speech to phonemes, where the speech is then translated into phonemes, which are the smallest units of sound in a language, to just individual like letter sounds like ba or ka or things like that. The system then attempts to map these phonemes to an existing pattern from a language model. Then finally, in the last step, it uses this group of phonemes to try to create words out of them using a language model that uses statistical probabilities to predict words based on the context of previous words that have already been distinguished. This method helps to differentiate between homonyms such as right like correct and right like taking notes. Another form of biometric security is retina scanning, which works by identifying a unique pattern of blood vessels in a thin layer of tissue in the back of the eye, which is the retina. Again, there are four primary stages, which are the capture, where a retina scanner emits a low-level infrared light, which is absorbed by the blood vessels in the eye, making them appear darker. The pattern mapping stage is where the scanner captures reflected light off of those blood vessels and records patterns in them to create a unique map for each individual. Next stage would be storage, where, like other methods, the pattern is converted to a digital signature and is encrypted and stored in a database alongside other users' signatures. And then finally, there's a verification stage in which the user submits a scan, and that scan is cross-checked against the database to ensure that the user is who they do claim to be. Biometric security is now used in a very large variety of industries, including mobile devices, where it is used for device unlocking, app security, and data protection. Um, Face ID is used for password managers all over the place, even to just get into your phone. Financial services, such as digital wallets, transaction verification. Public safety uses it in surveillance systems, where they use facial recognition. Prison security and criminal identification through fingerprints. Workplace security uses it through access control to keep certain people out of certain parts of the building. Multi-factor authentication to keep systems secure, and even clock-in systems where, like I said earlier, they'll use fingerprint scanners to ensure that people clocking in are who they say to be instead of having their friends clock in. Healthcare fields may also use it for patient identification or also access control to certain areas of the building. Border security uses it often in passport verification and just enhanced security techniques because biometric security is so secure. In education, attendance systems may be used as well as exam security just to ensure that the people taking the exams are who they claim to be. And finally, voting, it is used in voter authentication and even electronic voting to ensure a secure system. Here's a comparison of some types of biometric security and how they perform across different fields. In the accuracy field, facial recognition does have a few vulnerabilities just because in the 2D systems, it may be tricked by being shown just a blank picture of a face, not a blank, but a picture of a face. It may recognize that, but the other ones are pretty accurate. Intrusiveness, most of them aren't very intrusive except for retina scanning, where it does have to get up close to your eye and it does emit infrared light, like I said. Ease, all of them are relatively easy to use, again with the exception of retina scanning, but even then it's not very difficult. Um, Most of them are also relatively cost efficient, except for retina scanning, just because it's one of the newer ones and hasn't been developed as much. Um, but there are other specific ones, such as thermal recognition and thermal facial recognition and ultrasonic fingerprint recognition are the two that are more costly in their respective fields. And then finally, in the resistance to spoofing, facial recognition falls behind in this field a little, just due to some systems being vulnerable to false positives of 2D images. Some benefits are that biometrics are unique to each individual, making them very difficult to forge. Many systems have a spoofing resistance to prevent unauthorized access. Biometrics are much more convenient due to not having to remember passwords. It is also very fast and is always available since your biometrics are always a part of yourself. Another thing is biometrics are not shareable, and fingerprints and facial recognition are now present in almost all smartphones and are becoming more used in day-to-day life in many fields. Some challenges faced are that some systems are vulnerable to spoofing and may be tricked by false fingerprints or even masks or voice recordings that are similar to the one being checked. Biometric data also cannot be replaced since it pertains to individuals. Once it's been compromised, it cannot be recovered or replaced. Then finally, data still must be securely stored by the collecting organization. So no matter how secure it is, it must be properly encrypted and stored to ensure that it's being used for the right method. Finally, there are some ethical considerations. So as far as privacy, storing and sharing biometric data can risk user privacy just because that data would be out there and it needs to be protected. Same with data security. Breaches of biometric databases are irreversible, and once that data gets out, it cannot be restored or cleaned up. Consent. All users must clearly consent to data collection and or usage. And finally, surveillance. Many people have issues with governments especially using things such as facial recognition for mass surveillance. It raises a lot of questions, so that's something that a lot of people are hesitant about. And then my conclusion, biometrics offer stronger authentication than traditional methods while remaining convenient and easy to use. With more development in AI and encryption, security and reliability are expected to expand the field and make it much more secure. And finally, with uses in such a vast amount of fields, it really is bound to grow and evolve and become more of a daily integral part of life. And here are my references. And thank you guys for listening. And that's all.